It was a Wednesday like any other, which for Clara Mae Thompson meant it was a race against the clock. The old oven in her tiny apartment kitchen was already humming, its groans a familiar soundtrack to her pre-dawn ritual. Flour dusted her worn apron, a fine white powder that seemed to have permanently settled into the lines on her hands. She had 2 loaves of her signature sourdough rising on the counter, their domed tops a testament to a skill she'd honed over years of practice. One was, for a regular customer, a small but vital source of income. The other was for her and her 7-year-old son, Leo. It was their bread for the next 3 days. But as the rain began to lash against the window, a frantic knock echoed through her small home, a sound so out of place at 5 a.m. that it sent a jolt of alarm through her. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a man, drenched and desperate, his expensive suit soaked through. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't anyone she knew. He just looked lost and utterly defeated. Opening the door a crack, she heard him stammer about a broken-down car, a missed flight, and a hunger that felt like it was carving him from the inside out. He saw the bread on her counter, and his eyes, filled with a surprising vulnerability, pleaded more than his words. In that moment, Clara was faced with a choice that felt far bigger than it should have been: her family's food or a stranger's immediate need. What does a person do when giving away the last thing they have is the only right thing to do? Before that rain-soaked Tuesday, Clara Mae Thompson's life was a carefully constructed fortress built on a foundation of routine and resilience. Her world was small, but it was hers. It revolved around her son, Leo, a bright-eyed boy with a mop of unruly brown hair and a spirit that hadn't yet been dampened by their circumstances. Their apartment, though cramped and perpetually in need of minor repairs, was filled with the warm, yeasty scent of baking bread and the sound of Leo's imaginative play. Clara's day began long before the sun considered rising, in the quiet solitude of her kitchen. This was her sanctuary. Here, she wasn't just a struggling single mother juggling 2 part-time cleaning jobs. She was an artist. Her medium was flour, water, salt, and yeast. Her sourdough starter, a bubbly living thing she affectionately named Hope, was her most prized possession, a legacy from her grandmother who had taught her that bread was more than food. It was a story. A comfort, a piece of home. Her dream, a quiet and persistent whisper in the back of her mind, was to one day open a small bakery. She called it the Daily Rise. In her mind's eye she could see it perfectly. A cozy corner shop with a warm, buttery yellow door, display cases filled with golden-crusted loaves, flaky croissants, and sweet, sticky buns. The air would be thick with the smell of cinnamon and melting butter, and the sound of happy customers would be its music. It was a dream she nurtured in secret, sketching layouts on napkins and pricing commercial ovens she knew she couldn't afford. The reality was that every dollar she earned from her cleaning jobs and the few loaves she sold to a small circle of loyal customers went directly to rent, utilities, and Leo's needs. The dream felt like a distant star, beautiful to look at, but impossibly far away. Her past was a landscape of quiet heartbreaks. Leo's father had left when he was just a baby, promising to send for them once he made it big in another city, a promise that dissolved into silence over the years. The emotional wound had scabbed over, but it left a permanent ache of abandonment and a fierce protective instinct toward her son. She was determined that Leo would never feel the sting of a broken promise, which meant she had to be his everything, his provider, his playmate, his rock. Her life was a testament to her love for him, a daily sacrifice made without complaint, fueled by the simple joy of his laughter and the warmth of his small hand in hers. The knock on the door that Tuesday morning was a hammer blow to the fragile structure of her day. When she opened it to the drenched stranger, every instinct screamed at her to be cautious. But the man who introduced himself as Julian Croft looked less like a threat and more like a man who had been humbled by the universe. His voice was raspy with exhaustion. "I am so sorry to bother you at this hour," he said, rain dripping from his dark hair onto her worn welcome mat. "My car broke down about a mile back. My phone is dead. I was supposed to be on a flight to Paris for the World Culinary Championships. I'm a chef." He gestured vaguely down the dark, wet street. I haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon. I smelled baking." His gaze fell upon the 2 perfect loaves cooling on her counter, and a look of profound, almost primal longing crossed his features. Clara's mind raced. 1 loaf was for Mrs. Gable, whose $10 was already mentally allocated to Leo's school trip fund. The other was for her and Leo. It was their breakfast, their lunch sandwiches, their dinner toast. Giving it away meant a trip to the store for cheap, sliced bread that tasted like cardboard in comparison. It meant the small, comforting luxury of her own craft would be gone. She looked at Julian Croft, at the genuine desperation in his eyes, and then she looked at Hope, her starter, bubbling gently in its jar on the shelf. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Bread is meant to be shared, Clara. It tastes best when it fills an empty belly. With a sigh that carried the weight of her decision, she nodded. Come in out of the rain, she said, her voice softer than she intended. She ushered him into her tiny living room, which was mostly taken up by a small dining table and Leo's scattered Lego creations. Without another word, she went to the counter, took the loaf meant for her and Leo, and sliced a thick, generous piece. She put it on a plate with a small pat of butter, the last of it, and handed it to him. Julian took the plate with hands that trembled slightly, either from cold or gratitude. He took a bite, and then he closed his eyes. The frantic energy seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a quiet reverence. "This is incredible," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He took another bite, slower this time, savoring it. "The crust is perfect. The crumb, it's so complex. This is world-class bread." Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. "It's just sourdough," she said dismissively, though her heart fluttered at the praise. "My grandmother's recipe." "No," Julian insisted, looking at her directly now, his eyes sharp and analytical despite his exhaustion. "This isn't just sourdough. This is artistry. Who are you?" "I'm Clara, and this is my home. You should eat." He ate the entire slice and then another. As he ate, the silence in the small apartment was filled only by the sound of the rain and his quiet appreciation. When he was done, he looked around the room, his gaze taking in the worn furniture, the stack of bills on the counter held down by a salt shaker, and the love-worn state of their small world. His eyes softened with a dawning understanding. He knew, without her saying a word, that the bread he had just eaten was more than just a meal. It was a sacrifice. "Clara," he said, his tone shifting from that of a hungry man to something else entirely. "A professional, a connoisseur. I told you I'm a chef. My name is Julian Croft." The name didn't mean anything to her. She didn't have time to follow celebrity chefs or watch cooking shows. He seemed to sense this and smiled faintly. "I own a few restaurants, one in New York, one in London, and the one I was flying to Paris to represent. I judge competitions, I write books, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that this bread is better than anything I've tasted in the last 5 years." Just then, a small voice piped up from the hallway. "Mommy, is someone here?" Leo stood there rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his favorite dinosaur pajamas rumpled. Clara's heart clenched. "It's okay, sweetie. A man's car broke down. He was just having some breakfast." Julian's gaze softened as he looked at Leo. He stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the small room. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice imbued with a sincerity that resonated deep within her. "You have no idea what this meant. I need to call a tow truck. May I trouble you for a phone book and a moment to use your phone?" After he made the call, he turned back to her. He reached into his wallet, but Clara held up a hand, shaking her head firmly. "No, it was just a piece of bread. Go on, you'll miss your flight." Julian paused, his hand hovering over his wallet. He looked at her, then at Leo, then at the remaining half of the loaf on the counter. A look of resolve settled on his face. "The flight is missed. The competition will have to wait. Some things are more important." He pulled out a business card and a pen. On the back he scribbled an address. "This is my hotel. The tow truck will take me there. I'm in town for 2 days before I can get another flight. I want to talk to you about this bread, about your grandmother's recipe, about everything." He handed her the card. "Please, come to the hotel tomorrow, for lunch. My treat. Bring Leo. Let me thank you properly." The request was so unexpected, so far outside the realm of her daily life, that Clara could only stare at the card. It felt heavy, like a ticket to another world. The address was for the Grand Alistair, a hotel so luxurious she had only ever seen it in magazines. The idea of her in her worn coat and scuffed shoes walking into its opulent lobby was almost laughable, but the look in Julian Croft's eyes was not laughable. It was serious, intense, and it held a promise of something she couldn't yet name. After he left, the apartment felt both emptier and fuller than it had before. The smell of his expensive cologne mingled with the scent of her bread, a strange perfume of two different worlds colliding. Leo looked at the half-eaten loaf on the counter. "Did the man eat our bread, Mommy?" he asked, his voice small. "He did, sweetie," Clara said, pulling him into a hug. "But it's okay. We'll get more." As she held her son, she looked at the business card in her hand. Julian Croft. Chef. The words seemed to pulse with a strange energy. For the first time in a long time, a feeling other than worry or exhaustion began to bubble up inside her. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, one she almost didn't recognize. It was hope. The next morning, Clara stood in front of her closet, a battlefield of faded jeans and practical tops. The invitation to the Grand Alistair felt like a dare. She pulled out her one good dress, a simple navy blue wrap dress she'd bought for a wedding years ago. It was modest and clean, but it felt inadequate, like a child's drawing next to a masterpiece. She did her best, styling her hair and putting on a touch of mascara, feeling like an imposter in her own skin. Leo, however, was buzzing with excitement. A trip to a fancy hotel was an adventure of epic proportions. He wore his nicest collared shirt, the one he called his handsome shirt, and he'd combed his own hair, leaving a stubborn cowlick sticking straight up at the back. The bus ride to the city center was a journey into another dimension. As they stepped off the bus and stood before the Grand Alistair, its marble columns and polished brass doors gleaming in the midday sun, Clara felt a wave of intimidation. A doorman in a crisp uniform tipped his hat to them, and she clutched Leo's hand tighter, walking into a lobby that was larger than her entire apartment building floor. A colossal crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of lilies and money. Julian was waiting for them by a towering floral arrangement. He wasn't the drenched, desperate man from her doorstep. Today, he was composed, elegant in a tailored blazer and dark jeans. He looked like he belonged there. When he saw them, a warm, genuine smile spread across his face, instantly putting Clara at ease. "Clara, Leo." "I'm so glad you came," he said, crouching down to Leo's level. "It's a pleasure to meet you properly, young man. I hear you're a fan of dinosaurs." Leo's eyes went wide. "I am. My favorite is the Spinosaurus." "An excellent choice," Julian said with a grin. "A formidable predator." He straightened up and looked at Clara. "You look lovely." The simple compliment sent another blush across her cheeks. "Thank you for inviting us." "It's the least I could do." He led them to the hotel's restaurant, a sun-drenched room with white tablecloths and sparkling silverware. They were seated at a quiet corner table with a view of the city park. The menu had no prices, a detail that made Clara's stomach clench with anxiety. Julian, sensing her discomfort, simply said, "Let me order for us. I promise you'll like it." The meal that followed was a revelation. It wasn't just food, it was an experience. Tiny, flavorful appetizers, a main course of perfectly cooked fish that melted in their mouths, and a dessert that was a work of art on a plate. Leo was treated like a prince, with a special dinosaur-themed fruit platter and a fancy fizzy drink. Throughout the meal, Julian was a gracious and engaging host. He asked Clara about her life, not in an intrusive way, but with a genuine curiosity that made her feel seen. He listened, truly listened, as she spoke hesitantly about her cleaning jobs, her love for baking, and her secret dream of the daily rise. He didn't pity her. He respected her. "Tell me about the bread, Clara," he said, his voice serious now that the main course was cleared. "The starter, the process, everything." And so she did. She told him about her grandmother, about the starter named Hope that had been passed down through generations. She described the slow, patient process of feeding it, the way she could read its needs by its smell and its bubbles. She spoke of the folding, the shaping, the scoring, the intimate dance between baker and dough. As she spoke, her passion, usually hidden beneath layers of exhaustion, shone through. Her hands moved as she described the feel of the dough, her eyes lit up. She was no longer a cleaner or a struggling mom. She was a baker, an artist. Julian listened with rapt attention, his gaze never leaving her face. He understood. He saw the years of dedication, the innate talent, the soul she poured into every loaf. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said finally. "What you have is a gift, Clara. It's a rare and beautiful thing. To have that kind of intuition, that connection to the ingredients. It can't be taught in any culinary school, no matter how prestigious. He leaned forward, his expression intense. People search their whole lives for a product with a story like yours, with a soul like yours. You're hiding a masterpiece in a tiny apartment kitchen, selling it for a few dollars to pay for a school trip. His words were like a key turning in a lock she didn't even know was there. He wasn't just complimenting her bread. He was validating her entire existence, her secret identity as a creator. "I don't have a choice," she whispered, the reality of her situation crashing back in. "I have Leo to think about. Dreams don't pay the rent." "They can," Julian said, his voice firm. "They should. Clara, I didn't just bring you here to thank you for a piece of bread. I brought you here to make you an offer." He took a deep breath, and the air around the table seemed to crackle with energy. "I want to be your partner. I want to give you the daily rise. Not a loan, not a handout, a partnership. I have the capital, the business knowledge, the connections. You have the talent, the product, the heart. Together we could build something extraordinary." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. It was impossible. It was a fantasy. People like her didn't get offers like this. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not on a Wednesday afternoon to a woman who had to count every penny. "You're serious?" she stammered. "I have never been more serious in my life," Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I am a businessman, Clara. This isn't charity. This is the best business decision I've made in years. Your bread is a gold mine. But more than that," he added, his voice softening, "I believe in you. I saw your strength and your kindness when you gave a desperate stranger the last of your food. That's the kind of person I want to build a business with." He slid a folder across the table. "This is a preliminary proposal, a framework. I had my team draw it up this morning. It outlines a 50-50 partnership. I provide the funding for the location, the equipment, the staff. You provide the recipes, the training, the quality control. You are the heart of the operation. We call it the Daily Rise, just like you dreamed." Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, financial projections, even a list of potential corner shop locations for lease. It was real, all of it. The dream she had kept locked away in the quietest corner of her heart was lying on a white tablecloth in front of her, fully formed and ready to be claimed. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the words on the page. They weren't tears of sadness or struggle. They were tears of overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful hope. She looked up at Julian, this man who had crashed into her life like a storm and was now offering her a rainbow. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for me?" Julian reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm and steady. "Because you did something for me, Clara. You reminded me of what food is really about. I was on my way to Paris to compete, to win, to prove I was the best. I was lost in the ego of it all. And then I was just a cold, hungry man on a dark road. You didn't see a famous chef. You just saw a person in need. You gave me bread that was made with love, and you asked for nothing in return. You didn't just feed my stomach, you fed my soul. That's a debt I can't repay with just a thank you. Let me do this. Let's build this together." Leo, who had been quietly coloring on a napkin, looked up at his mother's tears. "Are you sad, Mommy?" Clara shook her head, a watery smile breaking through. She squeezed his hand. "No, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with an emotion so profound it was hard to name. "Mommy's not sad. Mommy's happy." She looked back at Julian, the man who saw her, the real her, and in that moment she made a decision. She closed the folder, took a deep, steadying breath, and nodded. "Okay," she said. "Yes, let's build it." The months that followed were a whirlwind of controlled chaos and exhilarating progress. The partnership with Julian was everything he had promised and more. He was a force of nature, a brilliant and decisive businessman who navigated the labyrinth of permits, leases, and contracts with an ease that left Clara in awe. But he was also a true partner, consulting her on every decision, from the shade of yellow for the front door to the layout of the kitchen. He respected her expertise implicitly. When contractors tried to tell her that her vision for a custom-built stone hearth oven was impractical, Julian stood by her side. "Clara is the baker," he would say, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If she says she needs a stone hearth, then we are building a stone hearth. They found the perfect location, a sun-drenched corner shop in a bustling neighborhood, just as she had imagined. Clara spent her days covered in sawdust and paint, overseeing the transformation of the dusty old space into her dream. She quit her cleaning jobs, a milestone that felt monumental. For the first time, her work was her passion. She spent her evenings in her apartment kitchen, not baking for survival, but for creation. She perfected her recipes, expanding beyond sourdough to create flaky croissants, decadent brioche, and rustic fruit tarts. Julian would often stop by after a long day of meetings, ostensibly to check on progress, but really just to sit at her small table, sample her latest creation, and talk. Their conversations flowed easily, weaving from business strategy to personal histories. She learned about his own struggles, the immense pressure of his family's expectations, the loneliness that often accompanied his success. He learned about her quiet strength, her unwavering devotion to Leo, and the depth of the talent she had kept hidden for so long. A new intimacy grew between them, a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. He became a regular presence in their lives. He would take Leo to the park, teaching him how to throw a baseball, and listen with genuine interest to his long, rambling stories about school. Leo, who had never had a consistent male figure in his life, began to idolize him. One evening, as they sat in the nearly finished bakery, the air smelling of fresh paint and new beginnings, Julian turned to her. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. My life is a series of flights, hotels, and boardrooms. It's fast and it's exciting, but it's transient. Being here, building this with you, it feels real. It feels like I'm building a home, not just another business." Clara looked around the beautiful space at the gleaming counters and the magnificent oven that stood like an altar in the center of the kitchen. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "For so long my life was about just getting through the day. Now I can't wait for the day to start." She looked at him, her heart full of a gratitude so immense it was almost painful. "You gave me this, Julian. You gave me back my dream." "No, Clara," he corrected gently. "You had the dream all along. I just helped you open the door." He moved a little closer, the space between them shrinking. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing." The air grew thick with unspoken words, with a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. The connection between them had deepened into something more than partnership, something that hummed just beneath the surface of their every interaction. But neither of them dared to name it, afraid that putting it into words might break the spell. The grand opening of the Daily Rise was a week away. The shelves were stocked, the staff was trained, and a buzz of anticipation filled the neighborhood. But a shadow of doubt began to creep into Clara's mind. She was a baker, yes, but she was also a mother who had been hurt before. The life Julian had opened up for her was dazzling, but it was his world. A world of wealth and influence she felt she was only visiting. What if this was all just a business transaction to him? What if, once the bakery was a success, he would move on to his next project, his next city, leaving her and Leo behind just as Leo's father had? The old fear of abandonment, a ghost she thought she had long since banished, returned with a vengeance. It whispered to her in the quiet of the night, telling her this was too good to be true. The day before the opening, Julian found her in the kitchen, long after everyone else had gone home. She was kneading a batch of dough with a frantic energy, her knuckles white, her expression tight with worry. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "Something's wrong," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara stopped, her hands buried in the dough. She couldn't look at him. "I'm just nervous about tomorrow," she lied. "No, it's more than that," he said, stepping closer. "Talk to me, Clara." The dam of her composure finally broke. The words tumbled out, a torrent of fear and insecurity. "What happens after this, Julian? After the bakery is running and you've got what you wanted, your investment back, a successful new business, do you just go back to your life? Back to Paris and London?" She finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Is this just another project for you?" Julian's expression softened with a pained understanding. He reached out and gently wiped a smudge of flour from her cheek. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked, his voice low and full of a hurt that mirrored her own. "Just a project." He took her flour-dusted hands in his. Clara, from the moment I met you, you have turned my world upside down. I came to you as a world-famous chef, and you humbled me with a piece of bread. I came to you as a businessman, and you taught me the meaning of passion. I came to you as a partner, and you showed me what it feels like to build a home. He took a step closer, his gaze intense and unwavering. This isn't about the bakery, not anymore. The bakery is wonderful, but it was only ever the beginning. It was my way of staying in your life, of getting to know the incredible woman who gave away her last loaf of bread to a stranger. I'm not going anywhere, Clara, unless you want me to. He paused, his heart in his eyes. I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since that first morning. The confession hung in the air, as warm and real as the scent of yeast surrounding them. It was the truth she had been afraid to hope for, the answer to a question she hadn't dared to ask. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, but they were tears of relief, of joy. I'm falling in love with you, too, she whispered, the admission feeling like coming home. He smiled, a slow, brilliant smile that lit up his entire face. And then in the heart of the bakery she had dreamed of for so long, surrounded by the promise of their future, Julian Croft leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or desperation, but one of profound tenderness and certainty. It was a kiss that tasted of flour and hope and the sweet and undeniable promise of a new beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the large front window of the Daily Rise, illuminating the golden crusts of the loaves lining the shelves. The bakery was more than a success. It was the heart of the neighborhood. The buttery yellow door was constantly swinging open, admitting a steady stream of customers who came not just for the bread, but for the warmth and community that Clara had built. She moved through the kitchen with a confident grace, no longer a struggling mother, but a celebrated baker and a proud business owner. Her staff adored her, and her days were filled with the purposeful joy of creation. The transformation in her life was profound. She and Leo had moved into a small sunny house with a little backyard, a place where Leo could run and play freely. The constant hum of financial anxiety that had been the soundtrack to her life for so long had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of security. But the greatest change was not in her circumstances, but within herself. The fear and insecurity had been replaced by a deep and abiding confidence in her own worth and talent. She was no longer defined by her struggles, but by her strength. Her relationship with Julian had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership that extended far beyond the bakery. He had rearranged his life, delegating more responsibility at his other restaurants so he could spend more time with her and Leo. He hadn't given up his career, but he had shifted its center. His home was no longer a first-class seat on a plane, but wherever Clara and Leo were. He was a constant, steady presence in their lives, a man who showed his love not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments, in the way he listened to Leo's stories, the way he looked at Clara across a crowded room, the way he would show up at the bakery at the end of the day just to share a cup of coffee and be near her. One Saturday morning, Clara was in her own kitchen, the one in her new house. It was bright and spacious, with a large island in the middle. She was teaching Leo how to knead dough, his small hands mimicking her movements, a dusting of flour on his nose. Julian sat at the island, watching them, a look of serene contentment on his face. The air was filled with their easy laughter and the familiar, comforting scent of rising bread. There was no desperation here, no struggle. There was only peace. Clara looked up and caught Julian's eye. He smiled at her, a smile that held all the love and history that had passed between them. In that simple, ordinary moment, the full circle of her journey became clear. It had all started with a single loaf of bread, an act of kindness offered without expectation. It was a choice born from her own quiet strength, a strength she had possessed all along. Julian hadn't saved her. He had simply been the one to finally see her, to hold up a mirror and show her the powerful, talented, and loving woman she had always been. The world outside could be loud and complicated, the place of missed flights and grand ambitions. But in here, in this sunlit kitchen, was the quiet truth. It was the understanding that sometimes the greatest rewards in life don't come from what you seek, but from what you give away. It was the knowledge that true wealth isn't measured in money or fame, but in the warmth of a home, the love of a family, and the simple, profound joy of sharing the bread you have made with your own two hands.